Hey, this is Nathan Meunier, and I'm back again with another game dev audio blog. So I'm going to lighten things up a little bit with episode number 3 and talk about beta testing your indie game. I think one of the most important things that people tend to overlook, especially if they're small developers or indies or just kind of working on your own, is actually taking the time to get real-world player feedback for your projects. So you can use that to kind of shape and improve your game before you ship, before you put it out there in the world. And it's not always easy to get a team of beta testers together. It takes a little bit of work. So there's a couple of different ways to do it. I just want to talk a little bit about sort of what my approach has been, since I kind of, as I mentioned before, I live out in the middle of nowhere. There's not a lot of people that live nearby that I can actually test my games in person. And I don't really have access to kind of events or the ability to go to travel to conventions to do, big event testing, because it's really expensive and it just doesn't make sense for sort of the scale of the product I'm making. So I do just basically a simple mailing list based remote beta test program. If you don't have a mailing list, it's really important to start one. It's really one of the most useful tools you can have for marketing, because what it does, it builds a direct connection between you and people that actually want to know about your next game project. And so that when you launch your next game, having a mailing list gives you sort of a direct line to the people that are more likely to buy it or want to know more about it. So that could be a really useful tool for marketing, just sort of gaining some initial momentum at launch. So what I also do is I use my mailing list for beta testing opportunities. And actually, when I share the link out there for my beta list, I'll let people know that there's opportunities for game testing and other things, aside from just giving them information about what I'm working on or marketing to them. And I run all this through MailChimp, which is free up to, I think, 2,000 signups. So you can, if you don't have any budget and you're very small, you can totally sign up for MailChimp and use it for free. And I know that probably sounds like I'm shilling for MailChimp, but I have absolutely no financial invested interest in them, other than the fact that I use it a lot for my own stuff, and I have a smaller list. I think I've got 400 people on my games list right now, and I'm trying to grow that, but I'm pretty well below the threshold. So you can actually create sublists for specific things. Like if I want to create a beta testing list, you can do that very easily, and it kind of lets you do that without having to pay a lot of money or any money really, depending on the size and scope of things. So yeah, so I run the things through MailChimp, and what that does is I'll put out a call to my mailing list saying like, hey, I've got a project coming up. I'm looking for beta testers. If you're interested, let me know. And I think in this case with the project I have coming up, Missile Cards, which launches it launches a week from today. That's a little bit scary. I specifically mentioned that I was looking for people who were available and that were actually going to take the time to play the game and provide feedback. So I wanted not just people to get free beta key and to check it out, but I was actually specifically looking for people to be willing to spend the time on it and to kind of provide, fill out a questionnaire at the end and respond. Because that's the whole point of doing the beta, is getting that feedback. And without it, it's kind of pointless to do it. And I don't mind giving out free keys to people that are actually going to be interested in checking it out. But I wanted to limit sort of the key spamming, like, oh, I'm going to sign up just because I want free stuff. And what I also did was I tied this directly into my Steam Greenlight campaign. I know that Greenlight's going away, so it's not really super relevant, but in my case with Missile Cards, I was trying to get some initial votes to kind of push it across the finish line from Greenlight. So I also asked that people who were interested in beta testing, they take a second to check out the Steam page over on Greenlight, take a moment to watch the trailer, and then click yes vote if they wanted to actually participate. And then I also asked them to show that they actually did that, to take a screen grab of their vote, just so I could know that they were interested. So what that did is it kind of weeded out people who just wanted a freebie. And so by asking people to kind of take that step, it sort of narrowed the pool to the people who are actually more likely to actually follow through and do the beta properly, which is what I needed to do. So anyway, so that's how I kind of got the initial list. And one of the things you want to do always when you're trying to do a beta like this is try to get more people than you actually need, because there's a good chance that people will fall off throughout the process. So maybe people initially respond, but then they don't respond after that, or they don't download the key you send them. Maybe they will, download the key and play the game, but then not bother to follow up with the feedback. And that's okay. Like, that happens to a certain extent. You have to kind of plan for that. So what you do is try to build a sort of a beta sublist of your mailing list that is larger than kind of what you're looking for in terms of actual feedback. And that kind of accounts for the fact that not everyone's going to potentially follow through, but you obviously hope that most of them do, and that's kind of what you want to aim for. And then what I also did in this case with Missile Cards, I waited until it was through Steam Greenlight to finally start the beta. So there was a little bit of lag time when I sent an invite out saying, hey, we're doing a beta. Do you want to sign up and are you interested, to when I actually rolled out the code for it, because I wanted to run that through Steam. And the reason for doing this is that Steam has some really awesome sort of beta type stuff in the back end. Like you can upload your build, set it to the beta channel, create beta keys that only people who have them can access the pre-build version of the game without having the game actually live on the storefront. And that's a great way for you to kind of like get the keys out there. So you're providing people with the key, and then they're going to get instant updates if you update it. And what I did throughout my entire beta for Missile Cards was I actually updated the game almost in real time based on player feedback. So if people responded saying, "Ooh, I found a bug," I would hop on, fix the bug, upload a new build, and let people know. And I actually created like a versioning system inside the game in the beta that had a button you could click, and it would tell you what version the game is, but you could click the button and it would actually open up a web browser to I think a Google Drive document or Word document essentially that had a list of kind of the updated fixes and kind of things I've done to kind of keep it updated and fixed. So that way, if people were playing and they ran into something, they could actually check that list and see if the bug they encountered was something new or if it's already been covered, and then they could also see sort of the status of the updates as I was coming. And that was useful, I think, because it showed beta testers that I was actually listening to what they were saying and kind of keeping things up to date. And it was good practice for me too, because that's pretty common stuff to have to end up doing during a Steam launch, because people will find bugs inevitably, and you end up having to patch things very quickly during launch day if that happens. So it was kind of like getting my head in the game to practice for that before I had to really do it. And so that was really useful exercise, and why I waited for Steam to get the game up on, through Greenlight and available through Steam's backend, so I can use that to kind of run the beta. And Steam's very easy to update beta builds with. You can literally just compile a new beta and push it through the system, and then within 30 seconds, once it's up there, you can just click a button and it's in. So, and it'll automatically update, which was really useful. So that was really helpful throughout the beta process of Missile Cards. And there are other ways you could do. You can use itch.io. You can just send a build out. You run the risk of potentially having people pirating copies of the game if you just send them a blanket copy they can sort of copy paste and distribute. But then again, it's also, if it's really early beta, that's probably not as much of a danger, because people are probably not going to want to play a fairly potentially broken or early rough version of your game. That's sort of what I did to run the beta and get it set up. And one of the things I did too, a couple tips to sort of make things a little bit smoother, is to set up a deadline to push right up at the beginning. When you send out a email and you actually get the keys out there, provide a deadline saying, like, hey, please take some time to play the game, check it out, let me know what you think, and could you please turn in your feedback by X date? And what I did is I set about a week. So I set the build out on a weekend. I gave people a whole week to respond, and then I followed up a couple times, because it took some people a long time to kind of find the time, because people get busy. And I understand that. It makes sense. So you have to anticipate there's a little time. But the longer you let it run, or if it's an ongoing thing, people feel less, it doesn't feel as urgent, so they don't, it's more likely for them to put it off if they're busy doing other things. So I set a deadline of a week to say, just things are coming along quickly, I want to keep this rolling, so give me your feedback as quick as possible by this date, which is a week out. And the other thing I did too is when I sent the key out, I also included a 5 to 7 questions. And I think this is a really important step, because if you just ask for general feedback, you're going to get a whole lot of random stuff. I came up with about 5 to 7 questions that were very targeted about the specific things I wanted to know about, like the difficulty scale and how that felt with the gameplay, what people liked and disliked specifically, if there's highlights or things that really bugged them about the build, and then some other general stuff. So that was useful because it focused the feedback into a couple areas that I really needed to get the most information on to make sure I could tune the game the best way I could before wrapping up the beta. Overall, I think things went pretty well with Missile Cards. I mean, I got almost all of the beta testers. It took me a lot of following up, so it did. I had to kind of extend it a little bit, but it worked out pretty well. I think most of the people eventually followed up with feedback, and I got some really useful criticism. I think not just people saying, "Oh, this is broken," or "I didn't like this," but like just thoughtful ideas about how to improve the gameplay. And one note to kind of touch on briefly is just being able to open your mind up to accepting constructive feedback. While some players are going to say stuff that you probably don't agree with, some people might not be the most nice about it. I think most part they are, because beta testing is like they're working with you to improve the game. But some of the stuff you're going to get isn't going to necessarily be like the most super happy, fun, positive stuff, and that's okay, because you want constructive criticism, and you also understand that you don't have to necessarily take every single thing people suggest. and make it into the game. It's more of like just to get some general stuff to kind of guide those final decisions and uncover bugs if they pop up. It's not always easy to hear criticism of your game, but this is the time you really want to do it. It's when you're ahead of launch, you haven't launched your game yet. This is when you want those critical bits of people saying like specifically what they didn't like. Without this beta feedback, Missile Cards would be a totally different game. And as I'm, a week out from launch now, I feel so much better about the overall quality of the game because of those beta testers. One of the couple things that I made specifically based on that is I sped up the gameplay because people were saying that it was taking too long to switch over from cards, and sort of the conveyor belt system I built for this game, where it delivers cards out before you can play them, is very cool, but it was taking too long to kind of deliver. So I actually bumped up the speed of the gameplay significantly, and that made a huge difference on the overall flow. It cut down on the time of card matches, and I think it made it for a much better experience. A few other things I tightened up the tutorial because people were a little bit confused on things, made a lot of different minor bug fixes and things, added some stuff to kind of improve usability. And I think overall it's made a huge impact. And I think I didn't have a huge beta. So one of the challenges of working remotely and trying to deal with a small list, like I think I had about 20 beta testers, which is not a ton of people, but it's a fairly decent number for me because it's a small project. I was trying to get things done quickly and also get that valuable feedback. So I think that gave me enough variety of feedback that I was able to touch on sort of the key things I wanted to improve on the game and uncover some things that I wasn't sure about. You don't necessarily have to have a ton of betas, but I think the more you can have, the better, especially if it's a bigger, unwieldier kind of game. Missile Cards is very streamlined and tightly designed and specific. So I think 20 beta testers was a decent number for that. If you have a game that has a lot more branching paths or narrative or different gameplay mechanics or multiplayer or other things, you really want to try to aim for a larger number of betas. I think, whatever you can do. And if you're a small indie, small scale works fine too. And it was a really valuable experience to kind of do that beta test. It's really important to take the time to get beta testing and feedback for your games, even if it's a small game, because that's going to make such a difference in the final quality of what you're going to put out. As a developer, like you tend to get really close to your project. So I'm a Missile Cards expert because I've played the game hundreds and hundreds of times over and over again. And I know all the things about it. So it's great to get fresh perspective from someone who doesn't, to see how their experience differs from yours and then make adjustments so that it's going to provide a better on-ramp for new players and to give them a better experience overall, because they're coming into it as from completely fresh versus someone who's had their head in the design of the game for so long. Definitely take the time to do a beta test, and if anyone wants suggestions or other tips or ideas or to chat about sort of how I've done it before and what my experience was beyond sort of what I talked about today, absolutely happy to answer questions in the comment section if you want. Thanks a bunch, and I'll talk to you again soon.